Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Training, Tokyo, Japan. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, Michael King, president of SAS Institute. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to see you.
Well, I've known Michael, how many years now? It's been a long time, through a number of iterations in your career. So, Michael, let's sort of look at your career in Japan, why you're here, how is it you're running SAS Institute, what are the sort of things you've been doing. And along the way, we're going to pick up some of your early experiences of leading here and dig into that a little bit. But how is it you're in Japan?
Good question. So it was unplanned, for sure. Mm-hmm. I'm originally from Ohio, but I've been in Asia Pacific about 25 years, mostly in Japan. I started out as an APAC guy out of Sydney, Australia, but like most countries or most companies, Japan is most of Asia Pacific or more than half the revenue. So they said you should move to Japan where all the action and the opportunity is, and that was kind of my first pass coming to Japan.
Follow the money.
Follow the money. Follow your leaders.
So what was your first iteration here in Japan? What were you doing?
So similar roles. I worked at a company called Sterling Commerce. So I was kind of the VP of sales. So the story of Japan's kind of growing, but it needs to be much faster. It needs to be more aligned to headquarters. So they shipped me up here, and with zero experience. And
although what year are we talking?
This would have been about 22 years ago. So quite a while ago.
So we're talking about turn of the century, basically. Yeah.
Right around that time.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And I had no experience. I was a typical American sales guy. And I almost left because it was so intense. Wow. Because zero language capability.
Oh, okay.
Most of Japan at the time was zero anything was in English, no Romanji. Right. Everything was very much it's just Japanese.
Right.
And in addition to that, it was a very hardworking culture. I think I worked about 18 hours a day, every single day. And that's not what I signed up for originally.
Salary man.
I was a salary man.
Japanese salary man.
On steroids.
Yeah, really. Great. And you were running a sales team at that time, right? So that must have been fascinating. You've come from Australia, my own country, so I understand some of the culture there, and I can imagine a sales team in Australia, and I can imagine a sales team in Japan being totally different. What were some of the things that sort of hit you when you first started running the team in Japan, going, oh, this is different, or this is a bit challenging? What sort of came up?
Good question. So, I think one is the work ethic. Just the pure amount of time spent in the office and or with the customer was exponential compared to anything I was used to.
Well, the Aussies going home at 6 o'clock to go to the pub or go to the beach or go somewhere else.
Yeah, I was being polite, but yes, that was a great life actually, which made it even worse when I came here. But also it was a great learning experience because I started to understand what it took to be successful. I started to understand the sales process better. I started to study. Even though I couldn't understand the language, I could follow people and I could listen more. I was much more attentive to the non-communication things, which was was probably one of the biggest things I learned at the time.
So when you first start leading the team, sales team, right, and you don't speak the language, they're very obviously they're comfortable with what they're doing. They don't know you very well. So how did you get to understand what was going on? Who were the players? How to build, a following for yourself? How did you work on that?
Good question. So, I think even more so now, like language is kind of not important. It's helpful, but it's not the most important thing. I think the most important thing, as you mentioned, is gaining trust. Trying to understand, the environment you're in, so that you're able to continue to elicit information from people, as well as then try to motivate them. So it's a leader is important. But the leader is meant to raise everyone, not just have one person be kind of top down. So the trust, developing the trust, I think is really critical in any situation, just because of the complexity of how businesses run.
And with the other senior leadership foreigners, or they're all Japanese? You're the only foreigner in the senior leadership. How was that situation?
Yeah, I'm pretty much always been the only foreign guy.
Okay, so that's very unusual. So you got Japanese seniors in the company, yourself as running sales. And then Japanese team members. Wow, that's an interesting sandwich you got right there, Michael in the middle.
Yeah.
That must be interesting. So how did you find the dynamic of being managed in a Japanese way? Because you've come from Western culture, and how people are managed, how you manage upwards, all that sort of stuff. And here you are, you're in the middle here. How did you find that? How did you find people managing you that was different as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I think I've been most of my career has been working in a U.S. public company in Japan, with the exception of, maybe we'll talk about later, is Rakuten. But, there is that balance between, the headquarters management and then local management. And to be successful, you really have to be able to do both, right? So in the case of early on in my career, I had a Japanese president managing me. But, I would say 50% of that. The other 50% was headquarters. So then it was about trust between the local management and the headquarters management in a way that we had to create a common goal.
So they didn't see you as the spy for headquarters, because sometimes that can be a problem, right? You're perceived as someone here is to check up on us. Headquarters can't understand what's going on in Japan. We'll send Michael in there, so at least we can find out what's going on. You didn't have that perception.
Not at the beginning. I think I was lucky because I was so young that they couldn't imagine I could be a spy. I was like the nice guy.
You were too innocent, right?
I was too innocent at the time.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah, so this guy looks like he's going to help us. We can change him because he's so young. And there was a lot of truth in that, actually.
And I guess, too, when you think about headquarters, too, because for a lot of companies, the Japan operation is a bit of a black box, and they don't quite know what's going on. And so having someone in there who can actually explain that, but also the other way around, for the Japanese team members, often headquarters is a black box, and they don't know how to influence headquarters very easily. Usually their persuasion skills aren't Western enough to do that. English skills may not be good enough to do that. So I imagine your teams probably saw you as a bit of a white knight, too, to help them get stuff from headquarters that they felt they needed to be successful. Is that also something that's happening?
Yeah, in the early stages, I think that's really your only key value, right? Is you know the people, you can help communicate, you can get things done faster without necessarily trying to disturb the people here. You're just accelerating. So, for a while, that was the value. Like you knew Mr. X or Mr. Y, and you could get stuff done. You could get a result much faster than they could do on alone. And that was, I'd say, the beginning of what I started learning of communicating overseas, what was going on here.
So how many years were you in that job?
I was in here almost 5 years, so I'm typically about 5 years per company guy.
Okay, there you go. The clock's ticking already on the SAS, right? So what did you do next?
So after I did that, I went to a company called Borland Software. So Borland Software is a software development tools company that was early on quite famous in the space and started to move itself into the enterprise, and I helped try to really grow that enterprise business, Asia Pacific, and then in Japan.
And were you running Asia Pacific based out of Japan?
I was running Japan, then I ran Asia Pacific.
Okay, so you've gone from head of sales to country manager.
Yeah.
So what was that step up like? What did you find? And you got a different company as well, so a bunch of new people. You're 5 years into it now, so you got more experience when you just got off the banana boat, right? You know pretty much the lay of the land in Japan. So your starting point is different. But what did you find about, okay, now I'm the boss. What was challenging about becoming the boss?
That's a good question. So, I think even though in my other role is kind of the VP, which was the almost boss, there's a difference between really being the boss and not. So taking that, seriously, because especially in Japan, the president role is very important. Not only the role itself, how the U.S. sees it, but the local office. That I had to internalize that and understood what that meant, which was probably the biggest thing. But the second thing was trying to not change who I was, trying to be really true to who I was as a person and not get the title or the ego or the responsibility, something that was going to change my previous success, what got me there.
Right. So you found previously that good communication skills with people, being authentic, being cooperative, trying to support them, worked well for you in that first iteration. So in the second iteration, you just got more power, I guess, and more accountability, more responsibility. But you found that same playbook, for want of a better word, seemed to be something you thought this is on the right track.
Yeah. So I took a lot of that. I was on the right track. And then I kind of expanded a little bit because I realized that my limitations or the organization's limitations around, network and people and titles. So I started expanding, some of the relationships I had, and I hired some commons or advisors that were senior Japanese CEOs to help me to either recruit people, to get new customers, and or just advise me on certain things. That was very, very helpful to me. That didn't have that, we were cooperative versus kind of fighting each other.
Gotcha. And the first company in the first 5 years, how big was that company? How many people?
I think my team was, 30, 40 people here.
And then the second boiler is how many
A
people?
little bit bigger, maybe 50, 60.
Double.
So, yeah.
Just a double. So now you've got twice as many people. So now you've got direct reports, and they're basically taking care of their teams because you're the busy president. So how did you work out? Okay, how do I manage my direct reports, who are responsible for big chunks of the organisation here, and make that a success? What were some things that you found challenging, or things you found worked very well?
So, initially I was, because I think of my style, I'm quite good with one-on-one communication. So each leader coaching them, and that gets you so far. But as you get to the 50 or 60 people, you not only have to do that, you have to manage the team and make a team organization, team leadership structure. And that was one of my initial challenges, because I was good individual discussions, but I hadn't really built a management team. I'd managed individuals. And so I tried to spend as much time I could towards the end of my second stint in making that happen, because as you get bigger and bigger, it doesn't work at scale by the one-on-one conversations.
So when you talk about that, you've got, you're the only foreigner in the company. So all the Japanese are working out of a Japanese cultural context in the Japanese language, where for them, as a stereotype, teamwork is pretty well developed here. They can work as a team pretty well. There's probably not much you can help them, I guess, as a foreigner, being a better Japanese team. So where did you see, what was missing in that echelon of leadership that wasn't there before, that hadn't developed internally?
Well, I think one is that kind of the reliance on either not necessarily the president, but a spokesperson for the Japanese office was really missing, right? There was always like me, as opposed to them.
Okay.
And usually, like any good leader, it's especially overseas, is they're going to get multiple data points. So, if data point 1 says this and data point 2 says this, and they're not aligned, it will make things slower, more confusing, or looks the organization not too successful. So, the importance of leadership team is very important as you start to have multiple touch points. And that started, was very clear to me towards the second stint at Borland, where more and more people were interested in Japan, wanted to learn, and having consistency of message was very critical. And
so when you talk about the second stint, did you work for that company twice in Japan?
No, just the second. So
the second
first
phase
was Sterling,
of your career in Japan.
The second Borland.
I thought you may have come back to that. So in terms of, you've got about 60 people, senior leadership team, Japanese members, they've got their own team members. Often with leadership, you pontificate, okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what's going to happen, and then you go back to work, and then about, 3 weeks later, you realise, nothing's happened, nothing's going on, right?
Yeah.
And you start to realise that, okay, people are not actually signed on for this, and they're not agreeing to actually do it. And then often you've got to push that message, directional message, all the way to the bottom, so that every single person in the company is very, very clear what our direction is, what our vision is, what our numbers are, what we've got to do. So it's not just you in isolation thinking that's happening, it's actually happening. So how did you try and get that message all the way down to the most junior, the most new person? What worked in terms of doing that?
I'll start with maybe what didn't work. And
always good to start there. Yeah?
And that's a clue to maybe what makes it work is, a lot of times, especially in any public company, you focus on the quarter of the year.
Yes.
Without necessarily tying it back to any emotion, vision, direction.
Right.
And, and just trying to push on every quarter, you got to make this, you got to do this, or we're going to get fired, we're going to get laid off, we're going to do blah. That works for a little while, but that doesn't drive cascading, doesn't drive similarity of message. So moving away from that a little bit, because at the end of the day, that's kind of the most important, is, trying to raise it up and talk about and create a shared vision for the organization. And starting with that level and then asking the leaders, how does that relate to what you're doing? And so they can buy in on not only the vision, but they can buy on their portion of the vision. And then, working with the individual groups to cascade that down is kind of the way that I've seen has been fairly successul.
And to some big extent, I don't know that quarterly numbers as a structure is a very good structure for a country like Japan, which has got this very long-term view, deep client relationships, long-term strategy. And so here you've got this quarterly requirement. Did you ever attempt to get headquarters to cut you a bit of slack and say, look, forget about this quarter number stuff for Japan. We'll deliver for the full year because we need to do things differently. Did you ever try that, or did you say, no, I'll stick with the quarter?
Maybe not directly, but because I think, if you are a public company, that's pretty difficult. But, it goes back to kind of creating a vision, being credible, being trustworthy. And then I think you're already able to have that conversation. Hey, I can only do 90% this quarter, but next quarter I'll do X. And if they really believe that, and you have some consistency in the ability to execute, then I think it's possible. But there's not a lot of flexibility just because of the business model that we're in, and a lot of it's about really good planning in Japan. So that's going to happen. So what are you going to build a year from now or 2 years from now, such that you don't have a problem? So it's much more future-oriented management as opposed to in-quarter management, because by the time it's in-quarter, you can't change it in many cases.
And in many ways, you think that sort of longer-term planning would, from a business point of view, would be a much better system, but you're sort of stuck in this quarterly earnings, analyst reports, share price driving short-term gains. Interesting. And how long were you there? 5 years, I guess?
So about 5 years, yes.
And then what happens?
So then I decided to stay longer. So I went to a company called Citrix.
So what made you decide to stay longer? What was the turning point?
So Citrix, I stayed almost 8 years, and it was, I think, a combination of things. One is I had a great team, first of all. I built an incredible organization. The company culture was great. We grew significantly over the period of time.
I think that's when I met you when you were at Citrix. Yeah.
So we grew great. We grew incredibly fast. We had a great team. We were recognized within the company as kind of almost best place to work. So the Japanese operation, every year we went to the U.S. and all the U.S. executives came and saw us.
Wow.
And there's a nice vibe. So that was good. And then I also realized I needed to stay longer than 5 years in a role, because if you keep moving, and if it's a different space or different industry, you kind of lose that network or continuity. And you really you're not as, you're as well known as you could be because you keep moving around.
So what were some of the challenges going from Boylan to Citrix in terms of you had a great team, but presumably you had a great team when you got there?
Yes.
So your predecessor did a pretty good job, and you come in after the predecessor's done a good job, and you take it to the next level. So what were some things you're looking at going, okay, pretty good team here, business going well, where can I add value? What were some things going through your mind when you were doing that?
Yeah, so Citrix was a little bit different. So every experience I've ever had in coming into a Japanese entity, there's great people, but a lot of times they just need reinvigorated and kind of understanding the why and the vision and why it's important and what it means to them. So Citrix was a little bit similar. We've been there 14 years, I think. Flat revenues for like 5 years. Wasn't growing, but it was still relatively, okay. But it had been a 100% channel model. There was no very little customer interaction, and it was channel led. So I had to almost create another team that was more customer facing, much more aggressive, much more presenting the new message versus maybe quite an old message, a legacy message. So I kind of rebuilt the team.
External to the channel, or are you working through the channel?
Always through the channel, but we
created
a high touch.
You're driving the channel harder.
We're leading them, basically. Leading and feeding them as opposed to just taking orders, which was for a while.
Because a lot of cases with the distribution system here, they like to have their power to do it their way, and they carry more than one product. So you've got part allocation of time on their salespeople's watch as well. So, how do you get around that? So what you're saying is you've got your team, a specialised team, to really work harder with the distribution system to have more attention on your products and more drive to get bigger numbers. And that's basically how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the same thing, creating a vision and explaining to the partners where you're going, right? And, a lot of times you're right, they don't care as much because they're definitely numbers too oriented. But I think it's then explaining why it really needs to happen and showing other successes, right? And say, if we do this, then we'll be 5X. Trust me. And the way we do that is X, Y, and Z. So by moving the needle and say it's not going to detract your business, it's going to grow your business. It may take time, but we're going to be much more leading than following. And it turned out actually very, very well. But there was a time where people were skeptical It introduced more channel partners. It introduced a bigger competition, but bigger competition creates more awareness and opportunity, and that's actually what happened.
In my experience with the distribution system here, I found that there's a bit of a wall. You're got your suppliers, your distribution system, they've got their clients, and they roll off their clients to you. But not in every case, but in some cases where we could get the distributor to understand we're not trying to go around them. We're trying to 10x their business. And we would go with them to the top 20% of clients and have some interaction with them and sort of stoke the embers a bit to get a bit of a fire going here, more passion, enthusiasm. And that worked very, very well. I was in the trade area, a little bit different area, but did you ever try that, to try and go with the distribution to the top buyers and then try and stoke demand a bit harder?
I think maybe all the above, but if depending on how you're perceived in the market, you may not have enough time to do that because if you're a rapidly changing company or technology, the tiers of distribution. It's not just the distributor, but it's the channel partner, it's the reseller, maybe 2 or 3 people between you. So it's impossible to actually get everyone involved, and the distributor will take so much time. So, yes, messaging, yes, maybe a couple important customers, but not as much so. It was more, we're going to go do this, here's why we're going to do this, here's why you're going to grow, and then every quarter we're going to give an update to you on how we're tracking. And I think that works better because there's too many people throughout the layers to convince.
Too deep.
And you don't have enough time.
Yeah. Okay. And so Citrix was 8 years, then you go to?
So Citrix 8 years, and then I joined a company called Autodesk. And Autodesk was a really fascinating company. Actually, I only stayed a year. But it was something I really wanted to do because it was moving from perpetual to subscription model. So in IT still is a lot of it is perpetual based, but the world is subscription, and I wanted to be part of that transformation and helping the Japanese operation. So when you talk perpetual,
maybe some people don't understand what you mean by perpetual compared to subscription. What's the difference?
So an annual license, typically where they pay for an annual license and they pay maintenance fees, versus a subscription model is typically a 12-month or more kind of monthly subscription, similar to most cloud vendors are using today.
So the advantage to the buyer is that they're getting the costs sort of harmonized across the year as opposed to one big bill. Is that the idea?
That's one, and it's also, it drives actually better engagement with the vendor because in a perpetual model, generally speaking, companies sell it once and they move on.
See you in 12 months' time, right?
Yes, kind of like that. Yeah. In a subscription model, you're almost on the hook every month.
You're sticky.
It's much more sticky. So the price is down. You're in it more together.
Right.
And it drives a lot of change. In how you interact with a customer and then how you interact with a partner, because the initial cost is now much less as opposed to before. The cost was much higher, which meant there's more channel.
But you're looking at lifetime value of the customer
value,
as opposed to transactional value for 1 year. And how big was Autodesk when you took it out?
So Autodesk, I actually had 2 roles in that. It was only a year, but I was a part of a Asia Pacific channel group, which I wanted to get back to an Asia Pacific role. That was the other reason. Okay. And then I also had the president role for about 6 months. And we were several $100 million. And we went to the subscription model that reduced because of the business model. But it was quite a big operation.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. How many people?
Maybe 300.
300.
Or so.
So you've gone from, at Citrix, how many people at Citrix? About 80, was it?
No, Citrix actually, by the time I left, was almost 300 too.
Oh, it's so...
So it was somewhat comparable in size.
Okay. So comparable in size. So again, you've had a fair bit of experience in Japan. You turn up to Autodesk. Okay, it's only a year, but you've got a fair bit of information now about what things work in Japan. So when you come into Autodesk, what are some of the first things you do?
So similar thing. Well, first listening. So it's super critical to understand, why, what's on people's mind, because you were hired by the APAC or the corporate people, so you kind of know why. But then you really need to know why. So I spent a fair amount of time trying to understand why things are working, what's the current state, how our partners are thinking, and then merged those two things together and started to create a vision for the organization, especially when we were moving through a massive transformation, because not only is it for the customers, but the channel partners really have to change dramatically because they're on a one-time commission fee that's high versus a very small one. So the channel
must have been a bit,
challenges were not so pleased by that.
They're not so keen about the subscription model.
Yeah, they were not, because at least at that time, they had not really changed the way they pay their salespeople. So it's not about, they want to or not. It's the commission plans of the salespeople and how the organization's doing. So, working through all that and trying to find a way to bridge that gap between, the headquarters expectation and the channel partner, and then the customer and what their expectation is as well. Because if the customer for 25 years has bought a perpetual license, and then less than 6 months later they have to buy something different, there's a lot of explanation required.
And so is Autodesk still going?
Yeah. Right. Autodesk has been wildly successful.
Imagine that today, for example, just if you think about it, how the whole subscription model has become very strong in the last couple of years.
Yes.
Probably, if you're having that conversation today, there'd be a lot more acceptance of the subscription model. That was probably quite early.
Yeah, it was.
People like subscription model. Yeah. Why would I want to do that? But today, it'd be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah, so Adobe was really the first. And second was Microsoft Office 365. Third was Autodesk.
Yeah.
So you're right. That it was still relatively pioneerish, especially in the segment that Autodesk was in, which was like manufacturing and architecture.
And then after Autodesk, you go to?
So after Autodesk, I joined Rakuten.
Rakuten. And I met you again when you were at Rakuten. We did some training for you at Rakuten, remember? And so that's a very different company. You've got a very charismatic president.
Yep.
Kitani-san, very, dynamic organization, a scrabbling organization, I would say. And you had a particular role there. What was your role?
So I originally started as a CIO of Ichiba, which is the core, or one of the core engines of Rakuten, the e-commerce engine.
Yeah. And so how many people are you looking after?
So that was very interesting. So I'd always been on the sales general management side. One of the reasons I joined, in addition to Mikitani and the company and the vision, I wanted to become an end user. So I'd sold to CIOs or other leaders before, but I'd never been one. So this was a very unique opportunity to be one. And then also I could understand more about what a Japanese company really was versus what I perceived it to be. So
what did you find? What was different?
So I don't know if there's that much difference between Japanese and Western companies in terms of what I learned, but I think it's all about management style and leadership. It's not about Japanese or something else. It's about who the leader is. In particular, Mikitani, who's a very charismatic, very driven leader. He's one of the key drivers of the company.
He's one of the most remarkable men in modern day Japan.
Yeah, for sure.
So what was the culture like there? I mean, you come in, like he's built the company from nothing, right? And so he's put his stamp on that company, and it's a very dynamic company, done many things. And then you come in. So there's a very dominant, founder-driven culture, which is different to the sort of corporate culture of shareholder value, blah, right? This is his baby, okay? This is my baby here. You're coming in. What was different for you, and how you managed in that role by him?
Yeah, so, I may have to answer part of your question. So when I took over the team, I had about 1,200 people. So it was a big jump.
You were taking care of 1,200 people.
So 1,200 people.
Times.
4x. They were largely developers or engineers because I was the tech space.
They don't speak to anyone, so that's okay.
So they don't speak, but they were they're the English-speaking people within the operation, largely.
Well, everyone's an English-speaking person
everyone
by
is,
default, right?
Yes, so they're fairly global in nature, but. The thing that I don't know if it's really that different in terms of, a leader, regardless of where the leader is, whoever the leader is, you have to be able to work with and communicate and interpret their vision to the team. And, maybe in Rakuten it was a little bit harder just because the leader was so close as opposed to my previous ones, they're overseas. And so the interpretation had to be more real time as opposed to maybe a vision, because the vision's established.
And how did Mikitani-san manage you?
So I actually didn't work for him. I worked within the commerce group.
Okay.
So there was another layer between.
A layer, okay.
Yeah, but
so how were you managed by your boss? What was that like?
So Rakuten it's an amazing company. So the average age of 70% of the employees is under 30.
I know.
So when I was in Achieve, I had 72 nationalities working for me, which is a very large number of nationalities. And it's actually not that. It's very KPI driven. So very numbers oriented. And very much a kind of weekly meeting, weekly cadence of discussion. So it's both heavily managed, but not exactly heavily managed, in that there's a lot of flexibility for people to try to make a difference, to experiment, for innovation. Having said that, there's still a goal that you need to make.
Did you have a lot of turnover as well? Because I'm guessing that type of culture in that company, in this country, must suit a certain personality type more than others. Was it a case of people would come in and go, oh, this is too much for me, I'm out of here, or people didn't have much turnover?
I don't think our turnover was any different than any other IT company. Maybe, not really. And in some extent, it was probably good, not that much, in that, for any foreign multinational company, Rakuten was a great recruiting ground because everyone speaks English. So, or we try to teach people to speak English. So you're going to have more people trying to recruit as opposed to some other companies where they're not as visible. Retention may be a more difficult problem. Yeah. But having said that, there is a certain type of person that thrives in Rakuten. It's someone that's young, that is trying to learn a lot, who wants to do different things, ambitious, and it's a wonderful place for that.
And did you have any special things in place on that retention side to keep the talent?
Not really. I mean, it's all about, it's really Mikitani's vision and trying to give people enough rope to be able to, experiment and to try and to give, and not, but at the same time, put some fences around it so it doesn't cause any, any serious problems. But there wasn't as much retention, challenges. I think there was an acknowledgement at some point in time, an average group of people may decide to leave, but it wasn't.
How many people altogether in the company?
Over 20,000.
20,000.
So it's a pretty significant.
Like Mikitani run a 20,000 person company and put his stamp on it and have that, that control, strong culture that he wants. How did you find he was doing that? Because the scale is big. Most 20, 30,000 person companies, the leaders have a machine, but their ability to influence that machine is not that great. Yeah. It gets pretty quickly diluted by the heads underneath them.
Yep.
But Mikitani's a founder, so I'm just wondering what he was doing to really make everyone feel like, I'm a Mikitani star here at Rakuten, and we're all doing it together. What was he doing to get that feeling?
Well, I mean, he's an amazing guy, and he's a very good communicator. So he knows his stuff. And and Rakuten is all the 20, 25,000 people now, but it's really a bunch of companies. So there's an insurance company, a bank company, a mobile company, most recently. And all of those are entities that have leaders on top of them. And, it's really managed by that. It's not managed by 20,000 people. It's 7,000 people and 3,000 people and 2,000 people. So the chunks are, widely different, but I would say they're somewhat manageable because there's not 20,000 people. Having said that, Mikitani and the company has a culture of communication. So every Monday morning at 8 or 9 a.m. we have an Asakai, where the leaders present to all the people in the entire company of some of the strategies and direction.
Whole company?
The whole company. And Mikitani speaks for about 10 or 15 minutes.
Wow. It's like going to mass on Sunday or something.
So it's kind of, it's very informative, but it's also really cool to hear the CEO talk to you, right? And he's very genuine. He's very open. He takes questions.
He's speaking English.
He's speaking in English.
Okay. That makes it easy to understand what's going on, right?
But so there's a series of things that he's in touch with, and then the leadership team supports through KPIs, and it works well. I mean, it was a great company. So I did that for a year, and then I moved actually from the CIO to the data science group,
right?
Which was equally fascinating because that's kind of the bridge between
where I am. Is that all the quants in the data science?
So it's the data scientist, AI, machine learning guys. It's all the use of data inside of Rakuten. So I started that organization, built it to about 800 people.
Oh, you started that?
I started with the CDO, so Kitagawa-san.
Right.
Great guy. And then I helped kind of make it more of a refined organization and hiring and management structure. And that was great as well.
And then how long were you there?
So I was in Rakuten about 4.5 years.
Oh, almost 5.
Almost 5.
And here you've been here now. It's
2 months. Almost 2 months.
2 months. Okay.
So I got another 4 years and.
So what's the battle plan for SAS? Like you've come with all this experience. You've had amazing exposure at different levels of different organisations. So when you walk in the door here, day one, you've got the Michael think battle plan in your mind. What's that look like?
So it's trying to use everything I've learned, which was, IT, sales, general management. I think in many ways is changed in terms of model, but the way you communicate, how you manage people, how you manage a number, how you deal with multiple stakeholders is no different. So coming in with that knowledge, but also combining it with my data science, my Rakuten experience has been very interesting. Having said that, I'm still listening. I'm listening to the team. I'm listening to what their challenges are, because going in and saying we're going to do without understanding is not the best recipe, at least to cascade and get people on board. So I'm still in that process of listening to our staff and now starting to listen to our customers.
And I'm imagining, in that IT area, there's probably not too many people with your pedigree of having been in this country for so long, working with some really star-studded players here. So when you come and you go, well, this is Michael King, what he's done. So, whoa, okay, this guy's a serious player. He knows the business very well. He's done amazing things in these companies. So I guess that also sets up a lot of confidence, as opposed to someone who's been flown in from outside, who doesn't speak Japanese, doesn't understand Japan, doesn't understand the culture, and they're trying to get their head around what's going on here. So I'm sure from the Japanese employee side here that they must go, oh, thank God Michael's here, someone who gets it. That must be very, I think, positive for you.
I hope, but I feel that so far. But it's all about leading from the front and getting that trust and not assuming it's going to happen. But at least in the customer side, the people I've been talking to definitely value the Rakuten name and some of my experience, which I think then directly impacts the staff thinking that I can add some value in some capacity, or at least I'm not going to screw it up. And so far, I'm at that phase.
2 months in, so far so good. Right? So thinking back to the different roles you've had in Japan, one of the things here is getting people engaged. So what did you find over these different companies and over these decades now is a really good formula for engagement, getting the team engaged in Japan?
I think it's actually authenticity
But what does it
and
mean,
being
authenticity? Because you can be an obnoxious, loudmouth, dictatorial, terrible president and be totally authentic.
Yeah, that's true.
Genghis Khan reincarnate, that's authentic. But what do you mean by that?
Well, I think authenticity and consistency with a human touch, I guess, right? Because Japanese companies, society is very much people-centric, right? And especially in companies where lifetime employment still kind of exists. And making sure that you're on board with that and how you treat people. And not just saying it, but repeating the behavior, and which literally means authentic, right? Authentic is repeating of some behavior that's positive, I guess.
So walking the talk.
Walking the talk and doing that, and doing that as much as you can, not leading from inside the office, like walking around, talking to people, smiling, stuff that makes you feel approachable. It drives engagement.
Sometimes, I talk to leaders and they talk about, I go downstairs and I mix with the employee on different floors and just walk up to people and have a chat. In some cases, they say, their direct reports get very nervous, what is the boss doing? Why is he talking to my people? I'm worse, what are they telling him about me, So did you ever have those sorts of issues where you had to sort of tell your direct reports, I'm going to talk to your people, but don't worry, it's nothing about you, it's nothing surreptitious here, I want to, get the message down at a few levels. Did you ever worry about that, or you didn't worry about that?
Probably at the beginning a little bit, but, there's a time to do that, right? And I think you need to get the trust of the management team that you're not going to betray that. Right. Just saying I'm going to go talk to people may not necessarily be the best way to do that, or at least if you do that, you need to explain why. and and you could even invite them. So I think there's a couple ways, but I wouldn't lead with that necessarily, because it's all about scale too. So if you're going around leaders, that makes your job more difficult, or it's just not scalable, or it doesn't grow the manager. So I think I don't do that as much anymore, but there's times and places you have to do that.
Well, how many people here?
So we have roughly 300 plus people.
That's
And I was just hesitant.
That's a big enough scale to keep you super busy. So when you have engagement, that's really the door opener for innovation, because if we're building a better mousetrap, and we need innovation to build a better mousetrap. But if the people couldn't care less, good mousetrap, bad mousetrap, am I getting paid every month? I don't care about the mousetrap. No engagement. There's no innovation. You've got to have, at least people got to care. I forget who said it. Someone talked about you can tell the culture of the company by the person on the loading dock not dropping the package. If you've got the right culture, they don't drop the package. So in terms of if you've got the right engagement, you get the innovation. What have you found has worked well to get ideas coming up, and not just relying on your own ideas or even your direct reports ideas, but getting total idea base out of the company? What things have worked for you?
That's a good question. So in SAS, it's quite interesting here. So we're just celebrating our 36th anniversary in Japan.
Congratulations.
So we've been here a very long time. And I think in some ways you'd say 36 years, wow, that's a long time. There's, people aren't engaged or they're not innovative. But actually, it's almost the opposite I found here. I think there's still a degree of, we want to accelerate, we want to be more innovative. But, you need to start with just the, determining where you are. Are people really engaged or not? Do they want to be? Right? And depending on that answer, there's, I think there's things you can do. One for me is obviously always keep your door open, always be approachable, never say an idea is bad. Ask encouraging questions throughout any meetings you have in a positive way, and that'll start fostering certain things.
System for that, because again, that's you at the top level, right? But often, like I've been in organisations where the boss is up there next to the whiteboard with the marker, saying, "Give me ideas," and then crucifying the ideas as they come across. And people are just going very quiet because they don't want to be crucified next. And it's totally ineffective as a methodology for harvesting ideas. And often, you might be operating a level up here, but the section chief down here, in terms of getting ideas out of their team, is using some really prehistoric, ineffective methodology because there's no structure for that. Are you looking at is there some sort of systematic approach to idea generation in the company so that every layer of leadership is doing it the right way, or how do you approach that?
Well, I think, these days, most companies are heavily matrixed. So, there's innovation in theory occurring through each of the areas, right? There's, the role of the president is super important, but it's, there's a lot of other stakeholders that are involved in the process. So, driving the innovation or having that conversation is equally about, communicating with all the other leaders wherever they may be to make sure that they're driving that. Because, you as a president, most people don't work for you, actually directly. There's a lot of dotted lines. So you have to decide the areas to focus on and choose, and the ones that are the most directly impacted, either they're working for you or can impact. And then focus on maybe some systematic things, whether it's in some cases having external companies help do some workshops, which I think is actually very helpful, especially in the early phase where people still don't have that 100% degree of trust with you. Is build the leadership team, get some external companies to help with some of the methodology, and then kind of build upon that. Is some of the things that I've either done before or thinking about now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the other part, sort of engagement is one piece. Getting ideas is another piece. And you talked a little bit before about trust. And I I always thought Japanese were unemotional, those sort of typical Japanese poker faces, you can't see what the hell they're thinking. But as I've lived here for 36 years now, I realised the whole country runs on emotion, because that's where the trust here is an emotional idea. It's not a logical idea. It's I like you, I feel good about you, I trust you. It's an emotional decision and not a logical decision. So how have you found, or what have you found has worked well for you to build trust in organizations?
Yeah, it's really an an incredibly good, I'd say insight, if that's the right word. So, most of my career, as I said, has been in IT. And, IT is generally logical people and process people, and on average men. And there's a certain way of, communication style, developing trust, smiling or not, as you said, emotional. But my wife, who's Japanese, who's actually she has a jewelry business.
Oh, nice.
So most of her customers are women, and typically, fashion industry and those types. And there is another Japan. Yeah. There's a whole other world that's emotional, happy, like global, that a lot of times we don't see. And the reality is, people are people, and being able to, tap into that is really, really critical. So, once you realize that, I think you become more optimistic, first of all, and you spend more time thinking, okay, there is something to trust. And so I think that's a critical thing to consider. And, a lot of trust, because it takes time, is validation. So trust is not only making consistent behavior, but it's someone validating you, right? So the network you have is very important. So, if someone can ask, who was Mike at Citrix, how was Mike at Borland, how was Mike at Autodesk, and they're going to generally, I think 90+% hear the same story. So the more that consistency happens, the more the trust accelerates. And, it's not a planned thing, because I believe like being who you are, but that helps build trust.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English.
So one of my team members, she might have worked here as a temp staff at some stage, and then she'd been out of work for us for about 8 years, having 2 sons. And then I said, come and work for me. And then she did. And she'd been my PA previously when I was in the embassy of Australia. And she was making the point, not to me, but I heard it indirectly. She was surprised how much I'd changed as a leader. Because back in those days, I would have been just absolutely full-on leader and domineering and very driven, But Dale Carnegie has changed in terms of my people skills, my communication skills. She was really like, whoa, this guy's totally different. So there is hope. Even for me, I changed, so I guess there's hope for everybody. But it sounds like you got the idea much earlier than me, much better than me.
Well, and I don't know about that. I think if I think about the transformation, I think it was probably the first 12 years I was slowly transforming. Then I became who I was after that. But I was not, I'm not who I was at the beginning for sure.
Well, we got to be growing, right? We've got to be growing. So if you think about building a culture in a company, you've worked in different company cultures. How do we build a culture? What are some things we can do to build the right culture that we want? Because ultimately, as the leader, you're going to put your stamp on that in that business, and you're going to determine what is the culture of that business. How do you do that?
I think it starts with as I said, kind of trying to get alignment, simply between the headquarters culture and then the local operation culture.
And what's the tricky parts there? What's the challenging parts to do that?
So, first it's really understanding the past and how you got to that, because a lot of the times the why or the explanation is not really the answer. It's just somebody interpreting it for you. So having a deep understanding of, in the SAS world, why did we start out? Why are we here? What does the global operation think of the Japanese operation? Same thing on our side, and determining really, and trying to figure out, what's the reality of that. And what are the key messages that are similar and different, and how do we combine them in a way that people like, yeah, that makes sense, or I've heard that before, or I can support that in the beginning, but then trying to take that and say, okay, where do we want to go in the next 3 years? And going, so that's that type of buy-in / understanding is very important. Otherwise, culture takes time, and you're not going to impact it that quickly, especially in a company that's been around a long time.
Yeah, and I mean, that's right. We're absorbing the creation of the culture over 36 years. And you think you can come in and say, in 6 months, I'll just have this baby spinning the way I want it to spin. It's very optimistic, right? In fact, never going to happen. And if we think about some advice for new leaders, right? You set off to Japan. You've got to run the operation there. You don't know Japan. you don't speak the language, well, got your marching orders from headquarters.
Yep.
What would be some advice you'd give someone who is in that position?
Good question. So I guess maybe the advice that I started with, so I'd first listen. Listen as much as you can to what's going on, and don't come with a bias, because it may or may not be the fact. And you have to acknowledge the perception, but it may not be the fact or the reason, right? And that would be like the first.
And that can often be the case, can't it? Because headquarters can have a jaundiced view of how things are run in Japan, because it's not run the same as at headquarters. It seems like an outlier and black box, what's going on there? This can't be right. Fix it, make it more like headquarters, right? So that's not an easy balance to achieve, is it?
Yeah, no, that's kind of one of the hardest things. Is, especially when you come over, you usually come over for change, and change is immediate. So you don't have a lot of time. But having said that, you want to fix the thing that's really broken versus what you perceive it based on your experience before. And a lot of times it's not that, or it's not that simple. It's very complex, and there's layers of problems, not just fix a switch, because there's 3 other things you actually have to fix. If you don't know that and you don't ask the questions, then you're not going to fix it. You may fix it for a customer, but not for what you're really supposed to do.
And this is the problem too. Which questions? Because you're limited by your lack of knowledge to know what is the key question I should be asking to get the right information I need to go to the next level. If you don't even know what the question should be, you're really operating with a handicap. So how do you find out what the question should be?
That's a super good question. So I was lucky. I was young, and they gave me a rope to learn. But I think it's just admitting what you don't know, right? And asking for help and building a network. So in my case, talking to a lot of people, or maybe attending things like this, or even hiring, senior Japanese guys to help you out, or consultants, or anything. Because if you realize you don't know everything, then you're going to seek out ways to solve a problem. And I think that's the only way to, especially when you're early on. But even now, you have to admit you don't know everything. The world's changing in subscription and cloud, and there's more experts than me, and you just got to find those people. What
would be some other advice you give someone who's new?
I think Japan's a great place to live, and it seems difficult. Maybe it's not so transparent, but I would argue it's one of the easier places to work, because people are trustworthy, they're credible, they're generally authentic, they're process oriented. So it's actually not that hard to understand the state of the business, and it's predictable. Having compared to some other countries where there's lots of unpredictability that you actually can't control, Japan in general, I think it's a huge market. People are great, and there's some relative definition around how things are done, and you can stretch it a little bit. It may take time, but at least there's some definition.
Should they learn the language?
English?
Japanese.
Japanese? Well, it's always better, for sure. There's no question. But I think it's not, language is not important. The language is a tool to accomplish something. I think it's the mind of the person. So as you know, if you can speak fluent English or Japanese, but if you're really not explaining what the person's saying, the direct translation is marginally useless and even sometimes problematic. So, understanding how people think, why they think, is more important than language. But language always helps. And but I don't think that's the focus. I'd argue the focus should be more helping your team improve their communication in English, or at least ways to become more transparent, because as a leader, you can't do everything.
No. Particularly, I think, when you talk about matrix organizations too, where you're riding several tigers at the same time here, right? That's going to be taxing.
Yeah, it's important.
And how would you define leadership?
Leadership is a good question. I think leadership is people just follow you regardless of title.
People follow you regardless
of title.
Of title, okay. So if you're a leader,
you're a leader. Doesn't matter what your role is. Doesn't matter what your title is. People follow you. And I think that's important in today's world with the matrix. You can be the president, but 60% of the organization may not work for you. Yeah. So you've got to lead them, though. You can't be the president, because that helps a little bit, but not all the time.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
It was good. Thank you.
And join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.